Hi YouTube, in this video I'm going to be making a Skeksis, which is one of the evil creatures from a movie called The Dark Crystal from back in the 80s. It's a Jim Henson movie. I'm also going to be dedicating this video to a lady called Niki Lyons, who I met recently, and she's one of the people that worked on the Skeksis costumes back in the day. Nikki Lions is an amazing lady, and if you'd like to hear the mind-blowing story of how I met her and all of the amazing other things that she's done, stay tuned and I'll show you at the end of this video after I've made this Skeksis. So you can see the basic shape that I'm creating here. This is just using 2mm aluminium wire, which is really easy to twist around itself and just create a kind of armature framework. This gives me the very basic shape, and then I can model onto this. I drilled a couple of holes in each side of this block of wood, and I fed the wire down into the wood and glued it in. So it's all kind of ready for bulking out, and then I'll use milliput on top to create the main sculpture. So this is what I mean by bulking out. I've just used aluminium foil all scrumpled up, and this is really easy to work with, and it gives you this kind of basic shape really quickly, and then I can start putting milliput on the top of this. So milliput is a two-part putty. You mix the two parts together in equal amounts and it sets rock hard in about 4 hours. You can see here I've literally just pressed it onto the surface of the aluminium foil. I'm just creating like a thin layer over the whole lot. It hardens so solidly and so strongly that it gives it this really nice shell. I used a tool called a ball stylus, which I use with a kind of a rolling motion to create all the ridges up in the hood area. So the Skeksis wear lots of robes, and they all have really nice texture effects to them. So I've decided to do that with milliput. So I've rolled out a layer of milliput. I've just cut out this square of shopping bag, just sort of Hessian type texture, and I'm just going to lay this on the top, and then I'm just going to press this with a rolling pin just to get the texture to come out. So you have to press reasonably firmly when you're doing this. It's not the sort of thing that's actually particularly easy to do when you're holding a camera in one hand and rolling with the other hand. But anyway, you'll get the idea. I could have rolled the milliput a lot thinner for this kind of fabric that I'm making, but I wanted it to be pretty thick so that it's really strong on my Skeksis model. Right, if I peel off this Hessian, you'll be able to see the really nice texture underneath. It just gives this kind of like grid pattern, which later on when I come to paint this, if I paint it with acrylic, you can use some dark kind of watered down acrylic and it'll soak down into all these little lines and things and really show up the texture even more. I do have to be careful with this sheet because obviously if I were to push my thumb down onto any of it, it would squash the texture back in again, which I wouldn't want to happen. Right, before I show you that skirt section, which is what I made with the textured sheet, I'll just show you a little shirt that I've done where I've pushed a ball stylus in to give all these kind of little hollowed out dips. That'll look good painted as well. I've also made a little waistcoat with the little kind of emblem thing in the middle. That'll look all nice painted up. And I've started doing like the edge of the robe here, which I've kind of textured into, again with a small ball stylus kind of dragged, and kind of gives that sort of torn appearance or like really kind of textured material. Okay, here's the skirt. You can see all those lovely kind of grid sort of patterns that really do look like fabric. So I'm really pleased with how this is looking at this stage. Incidentally, this kind of silvery colour you can see at the bottom, this is also milliput. It's called milliput metallic, which is a really cool type of new milliput. I don't think it's even out yet, but it's due to be out sometime this year, I think. And it's really cool, but I just had some left over that milliput sent me, so I'm using that to bulk out the skirt at the bottom. Right, to create the effect of folded fabric on the sleeves, what you're doing is rolling the milliput really thin into a sheet and then curling the edges in on themselves to create a corner. And then you put one on and then you layer it up. We put another one over the top, another one over the top. Keep doing it smaller and smaller as you go up the sleeve. And you just kind of bend it until it looks right. Once that's done, it'll all be flat at first, and then you've got to add the texture. And that was done again with a very small ball stylus, just kind of pulling at the milliput over and over again, and it creates that really nice textured look. You can see here that I've done exactly the same thing on the other side. Next, I decided to make the shoulder pads, which are pretty cool. They stand out quite a long way, and I think they really kind of add to the overall shape. It's looking quite good. So again, the same sort of texture as the rest of the sort of hanging draping material on the arms. And then what I've also done is started doing all of the more detailed stuff to the hood area. Now this is sheets of milliput that are kind of cut out into these quite elaborate shapes and all just overlapped one on top of the other. I didn't mind about it having these slightly rough edges here and there from the milliput because I think it will all add to it and make it look sort of more like it's made of leather or something when I come to actually paint it up. Okay, this looks a bit strange at this stage, but you can see this is how I quite often will start making hands. So I use the 2mm aluminium wire, which again is easy to bend, and you're just making holes into the aluminium foil, pushing the wires in and then bending them to form just a rough shape of the fingers and the thumb. The staff is just a piece of 5mm dowel which I've whittled so that it's not just really flat. This is the bit of the sculpt that ended up taking the longest, but I wanted to be really careful with it and get all the good kind of wrinkles and everything into the head. So yeah, I've spent quite a while doing this. You can see as well all this kind of frill on the neck area. That ended up taking quite a long time because it's just making individual little thin bits of milliput, curling them around a little bit and then adding one at a time and overlapping them over and over again. People quite often ask me, why don't you start with the head? And I think it's for the simple reason that if I start with the head and I make it really detailed, I then quite often get lazy and I don't put as much effort into the rest of it. I just want to get it finished so that I can paint it. Whereas I think by starting with everything else first, I put quite a lot of detail into everything else, and then I want to add even more detail into the head, and it just gets even better. You can see I also carried on with the robe texture. So down the bottom where it's the kind of skirt area, same thing as before, rolling a really big flat sheet of milliput, pressing the Hessian material into it to give the texture, and then just folding it over and over itself to give those nice folds. Right, I think that is all of the stages of the sculpting finished. So I'll just go through and show you some of the details again. I can't help zooming in on this head because it's the bit that I'm most pleased with. But I've also added extra folds to the sleeves on the insides of the sleeves. I think that helps as well. It helps the whole thing look like there's a lot more material involved. I've refined the hands a little bit and I've made this little end for his staff. That was a case of making all the little bits and wrapping wires around as well into the milliput. Those will look really nice all painted up. You can see I just added a little ball on the end of the staff there as well. Right, for the painting stages, I started off by painting it black. So I'm using System 3 acrylic paint, watered down a little bit, and that means that the paint sinks down into all the little cracks and gaps and things like that, all the deeper areas. I know it's a bit daunting to paint a whole thing black, but actually this is the way that I start pretty much all of my painting stages. Next, I dry brushed this maroon colour, which is a mix of cadmium red and violet. So what you're doing here is getting the paint, having hardly any on your brush, and just rubbing it on a bit of kitchen paper until there's basically nothing left on the brush, hardly anything. And then you're just dusting it over all of the higher areas. So you can see all of the deep areas still remain black. And this is a really nice way of painting, because it means you're not having to be that careful. You're just literally dusting it over all the higher areas. So I carried on dry brushing in a few other areas. So we've got this really pale grey colour, which I've dusted over the whole face. I've used yellow ochre on his beak areas and watered it down, done a little hint of the yellow ochre into the eye area as well. You can see I've used this really pale purple colour on the sort of frill around his neck. I've used the same pale grey colour for these kind of robes that go underneath his main robes, if you see what I mean, on the sleeves. I've used a very pale brown colour to do his staff, and again that light purple colour dusted over the skirt really brings out that sort of Hessian texture, makes it look like material. I've used some silver System 3 acrylic paint just to do the ends of the staff, but I think I'm going to end up painting them gold anyway. Right, after a bit more subtle painting by adding little hints, little washes and things over the top, just tiny amounts of colour here and there, I've painted the whole thing with a layer of super PVA glue. So at the moment, this is it while it's wet. You can see all the PVA glue is still white colour, and that dries clear. But I've just done quite a thin layer of this, and what that does is it seals all the paint and protects it, because acrylic paint can scrape off quite easily. So if I'm, for example, travelling about with this model, taking it in to show my students and that kind of thing, if I've got it on my car seat and it's rubbing against the car seat, that can sometimes, take paint off. So by adding the PVA glue, it protects it and stops that from happening. Right, this is the finished model. Remember to keep listening if you'd like to hear the mind-blowing story about me meeting Nikki Lyons, the lady who worked on the original Skeksis costumes. You can see now that the glue has dried, the subtle paint colours that I've added to the face and that kind of thing. Just lightened up the beak quite a lot more, merged in quite a few of the colours. So all the wrinkles show up, but they're not like really blatantly obvious. They're kind of subtler now. You can see here I've added gold colour into the staff. I painted on a little highlight with white as well. And just all of the kind of subtleties really looks like leather. I know it's kind of hard to see on screen, but in real life, the bits of the cloak on the back really looking like leather, and this all looks like nice kind of fabric, different textures of materials all over the place. So I'm really pleased with how it's ended up looking. You can see I've painted that sort of bit in the middle there of his waistcoat, and again, look, put a little white highlight on that kind of purple stone in the middle. That gives it a nice little glint. So really chuffed with how this ended up looking. Really takes me back to watching Dark Crystal as a kid, and still a movie that I watch over and over again. I've watched the more recent series as well, which is also great, but it's not a patch on the original Dark Crystal movie, which would always be a favourite of mine. Right, let me tell you about the serendipitous coincidence of how I came to meet Niki Lyons. So I was due to go to Kempton Park racecourse to the entomological show, which is a show where they sell loads of live insects and things. So it's kind of the highlight of my year, really. But I stupidly double booked myself, and I ended up having to teach a Saturday workshop. I do adult education classes, so I taught my class for the whole day, and it was literally 10 minutes before the end of the day, and this lady just wandered into my classroom, and I thought, who is this? I had all my students gathered around my table, and I was trying to show them, how to draw or paint something, and this lady walked in, and I sort of said, can I help you? And she said, oh yeah, my name's Nikki Lions, and I used to, come to this centre when I was younger, when it was a college. And I was like, okay. And I was still kind of thinking, okay, but who are you? And anyway, it turns out, I sort of said, what did you do? What do you do now, kind of thing? And she said, oh, I'm a model maker and costume designer for movies. And I said, oh, have you done anything that I might have heard of? And she said, well, have you heard of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? And I was like, yeah. And she said, well, I did the Vogon costumes. And I was like, oh my god, I love those. I've got little models of Vogons and things. You might have seen, some of the videos that I've done in the past on those. And anyway, it turns out that she also said, oh, have you heard of a guy called Jim Henson? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, well, I used to work with him a lot. And this photo that you're looking at now is actually a picture of her when she was younger. And that guy is Jim Henson. And that's Hoggle in the middle from the movie Labyrinth. Anyway, she ended up inviting me back to her house, and I've been there a couple of times, and she's allowed me to look through her portfolios. So you would not believe the stuff that is in her portfolios. It's just absolutely incredible. So this first page that I'm showing you here is she did the music video for the band Supergrass, Pumping on Your Stereo, which is just a video that I knew really well already anyway, and a song that obviously everybody knows. So I had no idea that she did this when I got to her house. These next images that I'm showing you are from the movie Where the Wild Things Are, and she helped with all the costumes on these as well. It's great being able to see them all sort of on location and just see just how massive the costumes were. Every page that I turned over in her portfolio just blew my mind because she did the Duracell bunny as well. There's a picture of her there in the middle. She also did all the Teletubby costumes, and she had one of the heads recently in her new house, and it was really heavy. And she said it almost fell from an upper floor and could have donked her quite badly. She made a tiger costume for the movie Fierce Creatures, which was with the Monty Python guys. It was kind of, a bit like Fish Called Wonder. It's a great movie, and I've got it on DVD. But she said she put the tiger costume in with a real life tiger at the zoo afterwards, and the real life tiger shredded it. She also did Aslan from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And she did a bear costume for a John West Salmon advert. This is her working on the Vogon costumes for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like I say, they're really cool characters, like really kind of ugly looking, but amazing. And they just walk around so well. Like the movements are just as impressive as the actual shape of the characters. This is a monster she made fairly recently for a TV series. It's called Haggis, and it's particularly amazing, the movements of this. Like the fur flaps about everywhere and the massive jaw opens and closes. It's just incredible to watch. Right, do you remember the kids' TV series called Dinosaurs from the 80s? It was like a sitcom with these massive dinosaur costumes, and it turns out that she did all the costumes for that. I had no idea. So I'd visited her house, she was showing me around, and I went upstairs. I was looking like around in her bedroom, and just on the side there happened to be this dinosaur model, which I'll show you now. By the way, I was always a massive fan of the Dinosaurs TV series, and what you're looking at on your screen is a picture of some of the 80s toys that I've collected back from that series. Right, this is the model that was just sitting on the side in her bedroom. And when I saw this, I was like blown away because I had no idea that she'd even worked on this series. But this was her original model of Earl Sinclair from back in the day that obviously they made all the main costume and everything from. For me, obviously, it was one of the coolest things that I've ever seen. Right, so we know she worked on the Skeksis in the Jim Henson movie The Dark Crystal. She also worked on the goblins in my other favourite Jim Henson 80s movie, Labyrinth. I think you'll agree, an absolutely incredible person for me to have met. Really jammy. I was really lucky. The only problem now is obviously I've been around her house a couple of times and I don't want to keep pestering her and phoning her up and looking a bit like a stalker. So genuinely, I had the Skeksis on my to-do list anyway, on my list of creatures that I'm going through making. So I've made that, so hopefully I can at least go round again and show her that. And hopefully she won't mind too much because I really want to keep in touch with her because, like I say, like her career has been sort of like my dream career basically.